Imagine walking through a desolate desert or a dark medieval forest thousands of years ago. You trip over a strange rock. You brush away the dirt, and staring back at you is a skull the size of a carriage equipped with razor-sharp teeth, massive horns, and terrifying eye sockets. Without modern science, what would you think you just found? You wouldn't think dinosaur. You would think you just found a monster. Welcome back to Ancient Nightmares. Today, we know that the Earth was once ruled by giant reptiles, armored mammals, and apex predators that belong in horror movies. But for centuries, humanity had no idea that extinction even existed. So, when ancient Greeks, medieval knights, and early explorers accidentally unearthed the colossal bones of these prehistoric nightmares, they drew the only logical conclusion: legends were real, and the monsters were hiding right beneath their feet. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how ancient fossil discoveries tricked humanity into believing in dragons, griffins, and one-eyed giants. Our first terrifying misunderstanding takes us back over 2,000 years, to the harsh, unforgiving sands of the Gobi Desert. Ancient Scythian gold miners frequently traveled through this barren landscape, and they kept bringing back horrifying stories to the ancient Greeks. They claimed the gold fields were guarded by a terrifying beast, the Griffin. According to the legends, the Griffin was a vicious chimera with the body of a lion, the sharp, curved beak of a massive eagle, and a terrifyingly aggressive nature. It was said to tear men from their horses and guard hoards of gold in the desert mountains. For centuries, people believed the Griffin was a real, living threat. But what were those ancient miners actually seeing? Fast forward to the 1920s, when modern paleontologists ventured into the exact same region of the Gobi Desert. They didn't find griffins, but they found something just as incredible: massive, perfectly preserved fossil beds of a dinosaur known as Protoceratops. If you look at the skeleton of a Protoceratops, the origin of the griffin myth becomes hauntingly obvious. This dinosaur was roughly the size of a lion. It walked on 4 legs, and most importantly, it had a massive, terrifying, parrot-like beak designed to snap through tough vegetation or bone. Furthermore, the frill at the back of its skull, when broken or weathered by the desert sand, looked eerily like the remnants of wings or giant ears. Imagine being an ancient gold prospector. You are exhausted, miles from civilization, and the wind uncovers a fully articulated skeleton of a lion-sized beast with a massive raptor beak staring back at you. You wouldn't think herbivorous ceratopsian. You would run for your life and warn the world about the griffin. European history is absolutely obsessed with dragons. From the legendary tales of St. George to the beasts hoarding treasure in deep mountain caves, dragons are the ultimate mythical nightmare. But did you know that one European city actually put a dragon skull on display in their town hall for centuries? Welcome to the city of Klagenfurt in Austria. According to local legend, the town was founded only after brave knights ventured into a nearby swamp and successfully slaughtered a monstrous, winged dragon known as the lindworm that had been devouring the locals. This wasn't just a fairy tale to them. In the year 1335, workers in a local quarry unearthed a massive, terrifying skull. It was heavy, elongated, and completely monstrous. The townspeople immediately declared it to be the skull of the legendary lindworm. They were so convinced that decades later, an artist used the skull as a direct reference to carve a massive dragon monument that still stands in the center of the city today. But what did they actually find? Centuries later, when modern science finally caught up, paleontologists examined the famous Klagenfurt dragon skull. It wasn't a reptile at all. It was the fossilized skull of an extinct Ice Age woolly rhinoceros. When you remove the fur and the massive keratin horn of a woolly rhino, the skull that remains is incredibly strange. It has an elongated snout, jagged, menacing teeth, and a rugged, heavy bone structure that looks entirely alien to the European forests. To the medieval mind, a creature this massive could only be a dragon. They literally built their city's identity around an extinct mammal they completely misunderstood. Not all ancient nightmares were reptiles. In Greek mythology, one of the most terrifying creatures was the Cyclops, a towering, violent, man-eating giant with a single, massive eye in the center of its forehead. The poet Homer famously wrote about the Cyclops in the Odyssey, describing how the monster trapped Odysseus and his men in a cave, devouring them one by one. But the Greeks didn't pull the Cyclops out of thin air. They literally found its skull. Throughout antiquity, ancient Greeks exploring the islands of the Mediterranean like Sicily, Malta, and Crete kept uncovering massive, human-like skulls hiding in coastal caves. But these skulls were twice the size of a human's, and right in the center of the forehead was a massive, terrifying, gaping hole. To the Greeks, this was indisputable proof. They had found the remains of the one-eyed giants. The terrifying reality? They were actually looking at the skulls of prehistoric dwarf elephants. During the Pleistocene epoch, elephants had migrated to these Mediterranean islands. Over time, due to a biological process called insular dwarfism, they shrank to the size of large ponies. But here is where the anatomy tricked humanity. An elephant's skull does not have eye sockets on the front of its face. The eyes are located on the sides. That massive, gaping hole in the center of the forehead, that is simply the nasal cavity where the trunk attaches. But if you have never seen an elephant before, and you find a giant skull with a massive hole in the center of its face, you see a Cyclops. The bones didn't lie, but humanity's imagination turned a tiny prehistoric elephant into a man-eating monster. While Europeans were locking dragon skulls in town halls, ancient China was doing something far more extreme with their fossil discoveries. They were eating them. For thousands of years, rural farmers across central China would occasionally dig up massive, unidentifiable bones. China has a rich mythology revolving around powerful, divine dragons. So when farmers found ribs the size of tree trunks and teeth the size of daggers, they believed they had found the physical remains of these sacred beasts. They called them dragon bones, and a massive, lucrative underground market formed around them. Ancient apothecaries bought these fossils by the ton. They believed that because dragons were mythical creatures of immense power, consuming their bones would cure illnesses, heal broken bones, and grant long life. They ground priceless dinosaur fossils, some of which belonged to completely undiscovered species, into fine powders and boiled them into teas. It wasn't until the late 19th and early 20th centuries that Western paleontologists realized what was happening. They began buying dragon bones from local medicine shops and were shocked to discover they were holding the teeth of prehistoric mammals, giant ancient horses, and true dinosaurs. It is a chilling thought. For millennia, humanity wasn't just terrified of prehistoric nightmares, we were actively grinding up and consuming the last remains of some of the most magnificent creatures to ever walk the earth, all because we were convinced they were magic. In our next video, we are stepping away from the fossils and looking at the monsters that might still be breathing. We'll be exploring the terrifying theory of Lazarus taxa animals that came back from the dead, and the ones that might still be hiding.
You won't want to miss it. Stay curious, stay terrified, and we will see you in the next.